No one could get close to her until a human ignored the warning's asterisk. Welcome to a world where love knows no boundaries and courage conquers fear. The Nexus station orbited the binary star system of Kepler 442, serving as the galaxy's most important diplomatic hub. Representatives from dozens of species gathered here to negotiate treaties, trade agreements, and maintain the fragile peace that held the universe together. Among them walked Princess Zephyra Nightsong of the Valdorian Empire, and she was absolutely breathtaking. Her skin shimmered like liquid starlight, shifting between deep silver and pale blue depending on the angle of light. Crystalline formations grew naturally along her temples and collarbone, catching and refracting the station's illumination into dancing rainbows. Her eyes were pools of pure violet, holding depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she moved, it was with the grace of a dancer and the confidence of someone born to rule. But there was something else about Zephyra that made every being on the station keep their distance. The Valdorians possessed a unique defense mechanism, evolved over millions of years. When threatened or emotionally overwhelmed, their bodies released psychic energy waves that could paralyze or even kill other sentient beings. The more powerful the Valdorian, the more dangerous they became. And Princess Zephyra was the most powerful of them all. Jake Morrison had been working as a maintenance engineer on Nexus Station for 3 years. He was just an ordinary human from Earth. Nothing special about him except for his stubborn determination and an annoying habit of fixing things that others claimed were beyond repair. While other species possessed telepathy, enhanced strength, or natural armor, humans seemed to have gotten the short end of the evolutionary stick. They were considered the galaxy's underdogs, useful for manual labor, but not much else. Jake first saw Zephyra during his lunch break in the station's observation deck. She stood alone at the massive viewport, watching the twin stars dance their eternal waltz. Even from across the room, he could feel the invisible barrier that surrounded her. Other beings gave her a wide berth, some crossing to the opposite side of the deck entirely. She was the most beautiful and lonely person he had ever seen. "That's Princess Zephyra," whispered Cornuck, a fellow maintenance worker from the insectoid thrycreen species. His mandibles clicked nervously. "They say she accidentally killed her own bodyguard during a panic attack. Her psychic waves tore his mind apart in seconds." Jake watched as Zephyra's shoulders sagged slightly. Even royalty, it seemed, could feel isolated. "Has anyone ever tried talking to her? Are you insane?" Cornuck's compound eyes widened in horror. "One emotional spike, and you're dead, human." The Valdorian royal family is forbidden from close contact with other species for good reason. Even her own people maintain a respectful distance. But Jake couldn't stop staring. There was something in Zephyra's posture, the way she held herself so carefully controlled, that reminded him of his sister back on Earth. Rachel had struggled with severe anxiety, always worried that she might hurt someone with her words or actions. The isolation had nearly destroyed her until Jake learned to simply be present, to offer quiet companionship without judgment or fear. The next day, Jake deliberately took his lunch break in the observation deck again. Zephyra was there, standing in the exact same spot. This time, instead of keeping his distance like everyone else, he walked to the viewport about 10 feet away from her and sat down on a nearby bench. He pulled out his sandwich and began eating, occasionally glancing at the stellar phenomenon. Outside, Zephyra turned slightly, surprise flickering across her perfect features. Her violet eyes met his brown ones for just a moment before she looked away quickly. Jake could feel a subtle pressure in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm, but he continued eating calmly. For 15 minutes, they shared the space, in silence. When Jake finished his meal and stood to leave, he nodded politely in her direction. "Beautiful view today, Your Highness." Zephyr's crystalline formations pulsed with soft light, and her lips parted slightly in shock. No one had spoken directly to her in months. Word traveled fast on Nexus Station. By the end of the week, everyone had heard about the crazy human who dared to approach Princess Zephyra. Some called Jake brave, others called him suicidal, but most just called him stupid. The betting pools had already started on how long he would survive his next encounter with Valdorian royalty. Jake didn't care about the gossip. He had seen something in Zephyra's eyes that day, a flicker of hope mixed with desperate loneliness. It reminded him of wounded animals he used to help as a child on his family's farm in Montana. They would lash out when approached, but underneath the aggression was usually just fear and pain. The observation deck became their unofficial meeting place. Each day, Jake would arrive with his lunch and sit on his bench, maintaining that careful 10-foot distance. Zephyra would stand at her viewport, pretending to ignore him while stealing glances from the corner of her eye. The tension in the air, whenever she was present, began to feel less like an approaching storm and more like electricity between them. On the 5th day, Jake decided to take a small risk. Instead of sitting on his usual bench, he moved to one that was only 6 feet away from where Zephyra stood. The change was subtle, but he felt her stiffen immediately. The crystalline formations along her temples flared brighter, and several other beings in the observation deck quickly evacuated. "You're either very brave or very foolish," Zephyra said quietly, not turning around. Her voice was like liquid music, with undertones that seemed to vibrate through his bones. "My sister always said I was both," Jake replied, unwrapping his sandwich with deliberate calm. "She also said that the best things in life require a little bit of both." Zephyra turned slightly, enough that he could see her profile. "Your sister sounds wise. Where is she now?" "Back on Earth, married with 2 kids. She teaches kindergarten." Jake took a bite of his sandwich. Used to be terrified of hurting people with her words. Thought she was too damaged to be around children. Now she's the most beloved teacher in her district. How did she overcome her fear? Jake smiled. Someone showed her that not everyone would run away at the first sign of difficulty. Sometimes the right person will sit close enough to show they care, but far enough away to let you feel safe. For the first time since he had been watching her, Zephyra's rigid posture relaxed slightly. "You speak as if you understand isolation." "I understand that being powerful doesn't make you less lonely. Sometimes it makes you more lonely." Jake finished his sandwich and stood up. "Same time tomorrow, Your Highness?" Zephyra nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "I will be here." The next day brought an unexpected challenge. Jake arrived at the observation deck to find Captain Vorthik of the Hegemony Security Forces waiting for him. The massive reptilian being towered over Jake, his scaled hide bearing the scars of countless battles. "Human, you will cease this foolish behavior immediately," Vorthik growled, his forked tongue tasting the air. "Princess Zephyra is not some pet project for you to experiment with. Her safety and the safety of everyone on this station is my responsibility." "I'm not experimenting with anything," Jake replied calmly. "I'm just having lunch." "Your lunch." Companion could kill every being in this sector with a single emotional outburst. The Valdorian royal family is quarantined for good reason. Jake looked past Vorthik to where Zephyra stood at her usual spot, her shoulders tense with shame and anger. He could see the hurt in her posture, the way she held herself, as if she were a weapon that might go off at any moment. "Captain, with respect, isolation isn't protecting her. It's killing her slowly. Better slowly than all of us quickly." Vorthik snapped. Jake stepped around the massive reptilian and walked to his bench, 6 feet from Zephyra. The air crackled with psychic energy as her emotions spiked, but he sat down anyway and pulled out his lunch. "You're risking everyone's lives," Zephyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm risking my own life, Jake corrected gently. And that's my choice to make. The crystalline formations on her temples pulsed rapidly, and Jake felt the pressure building behind his eyes. But instead of fleeing like every instinct told him to, he remained seated and continued eating dots slowly. Incredibly, the pressure began to fade. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to be vulnerable. 3 weeks had passed since Jake began his daily vigils in the observation deck. What started as simple companionship had evolved into something deeper. Zephyra had begun speaking more freely, sharing stories of her childhood on Valdoria Prime and the crushing weight of expectations that came with her abilities. I was 7 when it first happened, she told him one afternoon, her violet eyes distant with memory. A playmate tried to surprise me during a game of hide and seek. The shock caused my first major psychic surge. He was in a coma for 3 days. Jake listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions. He had learned that Zephyra needed to process these memories at her own pace, without pressure or false reassurances. After that, they built me my own wing of the palace. Private tutors, carefully screened companions who were trained to approach me slowly and announce their presence. No surprises, no sudden movements, no genuine connections. Her crystalline formations dimmed with sadness. I became a beautiful prison, locked away for everyone's safety, including my own. That's why you're here on Nexus Station, Jake realized. You're not just a diplomat. You're looking for a way to live among others. Zephyra nodded. A Council of Worlds proposed this cultural exchange program as a test. If I could prove that I can control my abilities around other species, they might allow me more freedom. But so far, everyone maintains the same careful distance I've known my entire life. Everyone except me. Everyone except you. She turned to face him fully for the first time, and Jake was struck by how beautiful she was when she wasn't holding herself like a loaded weapon. Why aren't you afraid of me, Jake Morrison? Jake considered the question seriously. I think fear is a choice, in a way. I could focus on what might happen if things go wrong, or I can focus on what definitely will happen if I don't try at all. And what will happen is that a remarkable person will continue to believe she's a monster. Zephyra's eyes widened. You don't see me as dangerous? I see you as someone who's been told she's dangerous for so long that she believes it herself. There's a difference. The air between them shimmered with psychic energy, but instead of feeling threatening, it felt almost warm. Jake realized that Zephyra's emotional state was directly affecting the nature of her power. When she was afraid or angry, it manifested as a weapon. When she felt safe and understood, it became something else entirely. I'd like to try something, Jake said carefully. But only if you're comfortable with it. Zephyra tensed slightly. What do you mean? Jake stood up from his bench and moved one step closer. They were now only 4 feet apart, closer than any non-Valdorian had been to her in decades. The crystalline formations on her temples began to pulse rapidly. Jake, don't. You don't understand what could happen. Then help me understand. Walk me through it. What does it feel like when your powers activate? Zephyra's breathing became rapid and shallow. It starts with pressure, like my skull is going to crack open. Then there's this rushing sensation, like electricity racing through my veins. And then it just explodes outward, and I can't control where it goes or how strong it is. Okay, so what if, instead of fighting it or fearing it, you tried directing it, like water through a channel instead of a dam bursting? That's not how it works. It's not something I can control. Jake took another small step forward, 3 feet now. Maybe not the way you've been trying to control it. But what if you tried guiding it instead? What if you aimed it at something that couldn't be hurt? The psychic pressure was building now, making Jake's teeth ache and his vision blur slightly. But he could also sense something else. Underneath the raw power, longing, hope, the desperate wish to connect with another being, without causing harm. Jake, please step back. I don't want to hurt you. I know you don't, and I trust that you won't. Jake extended his hand slowly, palm up in invitation. I'm right here, Zephyra. I'm not going anywhere. The princess stared at his outstretched hand as if it were the most precious and terrifying thing in the universe. The air around them crackled with energy, and Jake felt the full force of her psychic abilities pressing against his mind. But instead of pain or paralysis, he felt something unexpected: peace, understanding, connection. How? Zephyra whispered, tears streaming down her face. How are you still standing? Jake smiled, his hands still extended between them. Maybe humans are more resilient than anyone gave us credit for. When two hearts refuse to be kept apart, the universe changes the medical bay of Nexus Station Head. Never seen anything like it. Dr. Kellen Reeves, the station's chief physician, ran scan after scan on Jake, his instruments detecting impossible readings. Meanwhile, Princess Zephyra sat in the corner of the room, her crystalline formations dim with worry and confusion. According to these readings, you should be dead, Dr. Reeves announced, his tentacled face showing bewilderment. The psychic energy levels you were exposed to would have liquefied the brain matter of most species. Yet here you are, completely unharmed and showing no signs of neural damage. Jake flexed his fingers, still remembering the sensation of Zephyra's power washing over him. It hadn't felt destructive at all. Instead, it had been like standing in warm sunlight or being embraced by someone who understood him completely. Maybe I'm just lucky, Jake suggested, though he suspected there was more to it than chance. This isn't luck, Captain Vorthik growled from the doorway. This is impossible, and impossible things make me nervous. Word of the incident had spread throughout the station within hours. A human had not only survived direct exposure to Valdorian, royal psychic energy, but had emerged completely unaffected. Scientists were demanding to study Jake, while security forces worried about the implications for station safety. But Jake only cared about one thing. Zephyra, are you okay? She looked up at him with those stunning violet eyes, and he could see the war raging within her. Wonder and terror, hope and disbelief, all swirling together in a storm of emotion. I don't understand what happened, she whispered. I felt my power leave me, felt it strike you with full force. But instead of harming you, it felt like ... like coming home. Dr. Reeves' instruments began beeping rapidly. Fascinating. Your psychic emanations are completely stable right now, Princess. More stable than I've ever recorded from a Valdorian. Royal. Captain Vorthik stepped forward menacingly. This changes nothing. If anything, it proves that the human is somehow affecting the princess's abilities. That makes him even more dangerous. Or it proves that she's not as dangerous as everyone thinks, Jake countered, standing up from the examination table. Maybe the problem was never Zephyra's power. Maybe the problem was everyone else's fear of it. You're suggesting that fear itself triggers the destructive response? Dr. Reeves asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. That would explain why her power manifested differently with you. You approached without fear, so her abilities responded accordingly. Zephyra's eyes widened with realization. The bodyguard who died, he was terrified of me. He'd requested a transfer 3 times, but was ordered to remain at his post. When I had my panic attack, his fear fed into my power, making it more destructive. A feedback loop, Jake breathed. Your power responds to the emotions of those around you. Fear creates violence, but acceptance creates connection. Captain Vorthik's scales bristled with agitation. This is all speculation. We cannot risk the safety of the entire station based on theories. Then let's test it, Zephyra said suddenly, standing up with new determination. under controlled conditions with proper safety measures. If Jake is right, if my power can be channeled constructively instead of destructively, then everything changes. The testing took place in the station's main laboratory, with dozens of sensors monitoring every aspect of Zephyrah's psychic emanations. Jake sat at varying distances, while Zephyrah deliberately triggered her abilities, each time maintaining calm, accepting thoughts. The results were undeniable. When Jake remained relaxed and unafraid, Zephyrah's power manifested as a gentle wave of empathic connection. When he deliberately tried to feel fear, her abilities immediately became aggressive and destructive, forcing him to quickly return to his centered state. It's not just about the target, Dr. Reeves explained to the gathered scientists and officials. It's about the entire emotional environment. Princess Zephyrah's abilities are designed to respond to threats, but they define threats based on the fear and hostility they encounter. Jake looked at Zephyrah across the laboratory. She was surrounded by people for the first time in years, but they were no longer maintaining the rigid distance that had defined her entire life. Several scientists stood within arm's reach, their instruments recording stable readings from her psychic emanations. So what happens now? Jake asked. Commander Thane of the Council of Worlds stepped forward. Now we rewrite the protocols for Valdorian contact. If these findings can be replicated with other species, Princess Zephyrah may be the key to ending her people's isolation. But Jake barely heard the commander's words. He was focused on Zephyrah, who was walking toward him with a smile that could have powered the entire station. For the first time since he'd known her, she moved without the careful control that had defined every step. When she reached him, she stopped just inches away, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns in her crystalline formations, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope. When two souls connect, the entire galaxy takes notice." 6 months after the breakthrough in the laboratory, Nexus Station had become the center of a galactic revolution. Representatives from dozens of species arrived daily to witness the impossible. A Valdorian royal living freely among others, her deadly abilities transformed into tools of healing and connection. Zephyrah had become the station's unofficial ambassador of hope. Her psychic abilities, when channeled through acceptance rather than fear, could ease trauma, facilitate communication between incompatible species, and even accelerate healing processes. She worked tirelessly with refugees, diplomats, and anyone who needed help bridging the gaps that separated them from others. But the most remarkable change was in Zephyrah herself. The frightened, isolated princess had blossomed into a confident woman who moved through the station like sunlight through crystal. Her laughter could be heard echoing through the corridors, and her smile had become legendary among the crew. Jake watched her work from the observation deck, his heart swelling with pride and something deeper. Somewhere along the way, their friendship had evolved into something neither of them had dared to hope for. Love had crept up on them slowly, built on a foundation of trust and understanding that grew stronger each day. "You're staring again," Cormac observed, joining Jake at the viewport. The insectoid's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was amusement. "The betting pools have expanded, you know. Now they're wagering on when you'll finally tell her how you feel." Jake laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "To everyone except her, apparently. Though some of us suspect she knows, and is waiting for you to be brave enough to say it." That evening, Jake found Zephyrah in their old spot by the viewport, watching the binary stars dance their eternal waltz. But instead of standing alone as she had those first weeks, she was surrounded by a small group of young aliens, all of them, listening intently as she told stories of her homeworld. When she noticed Jake approaching, her face lit up with that radiant smile that never failed to take his breath away. "Jake, perfect timing." I was just telling them about the crystal gardens of Valdoria Prime. The young aliens scattered as their parents called them for dinner, leaving Jake and Zephyra alone in the warm glow of the stellar phenomenon outside. They stood side by side, comfortable in the silence that had become their sanctuary. "I have news," Zephyra said eventually, her voice carefully neutral. "The Council of Worlds has approved my proposal for the Valdorian Integration Program. Other members of my species will be coming to Nexus Station for training in emotional regulation and peaceful coexistence." "That's wonderful," Jake said, though he detected something in her tone that made him uneasy. "You should be celebrating." "I am celebrating. It's everything I hoped for when I first came here." She turned to face him, and Jake saw tears glistening in her violet eyes. "But it also means my work here is almost finished. Once the program is established, I'll be expected to return to Valdoria Prime to oversee the larger integration effort with my people." Jake felt his heart sink. He had known this day would come eventually, but he hadn't been prepared for how much it would hurt. When? 3 months. Maybe less, depending on how quickly the program can be implemented. They stood in silence, watching the stars dance their ancient dance. Jake thought about all the moments they had shared, all the barriers they had broken together, all the impossible things they had made possible. And he realized that he couldn't let her leave without knowing how he felt. "Zephyra," he said quietly, turning to face her, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him with those incredible eyes, and Jake felt the familiar warmth of her psychic presence brushing gently against his mind. Over the months, they had developed a connection that went beyond words, an understanding that existed on levels he hadn't even known were possible. "I know," she whispered, reaching out to touch his face with fingers that sparkled like starlight. "I've known for weeks. I can feel it in your thoughts, in the way your emotions resonate with mine. Then you know that I can't let you go without telling you that I love you." Zephyra's crystalline formations pulsed with soft, warm light, and Jake felt her joy wash over him like a wave. "And you know that I love you too. You saved me, Jake Morrison, not just from isolation, but from believing that I was a monster who could never be loved." When she kissed him, it was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. Her psychic abilities wove around them both, creating a bubble of pure emotion where their thoughts and feelings merged and danced together. For a perfect moment, they were truly one being, understanding each other completely. When they finally broke apart, Jake saw their reflection in the viewport glass, surrounded by the soft glow of Zephyra's power. They looked like something from a dream, a human and an alien princess who had found love despite every obstacle the universe had placed in their path. "So what happens now?" Jake asked, his forehead resting against hers. "Now we write a new chapter," Zephyra said with a smile that could have outshone the binary stars themselves. "Together. Because if there's one thing this human has taught me, it's that love is the most powerful force in the universe. And love knows no boundaries." As they stood together in the observation deck where their story began, Jake realized that sometimes the most extraordinary adventures start with the simplest choice: to approach instead of avoiding, to understand instead of fearing, and to love instead of letting walls divide us. The galaxy was about to discover that when a stubborn human meets an untouchable princess, impossible becomes inevitable. The end